In this video, I will explain JavaScript array methods conceptually, which is one of the topics that beginners struggle often the most with, especially since the very first time you usually see array methods, the syntax just seems completely overwhelming. We're going to do this with the example of the map function, but if you understand the underlying structure of array methods, which you should after this video, all the other methods should be very easy for you to pick up. So if we look into the code, I actually have an example prepared in the kind of way that you might encounter array methods for the first time and then immediately decide this is not for me. So here we have an array of names with 4 names inside of them, and we have one example here where we say, okay, we want to make all names to uppercase if the name contains the letter I. Now for that, we're using map, and then in here we have this big function. It's not super big, but it's like 5 lines. And there just seems to be a lot of syntax going on. So let's break down what array methods actually are, and then let's try to break down especially this code here, just so that it makes sense, and maybe we can even make it shorter and nicer for you to have it easier to grasp. So, what are array methods? They're nothing else than an interface for you to actually just loop through your array. That's it. That is literally it. I mean, I don't know if I should let that sink in a little bit more, but they just let you go from element to element and do something with each element. Now there are certain array methods like the map function, which you're going to see all the time. There's also others like filter, reduce, every, whatever. All of them do the same thing. What they do is they go one by one through the array. Now the only reason why there are different array methods is because there's certain applications that you often want to do. And so they give you an easier interface. But really, when you think about iterating through an array, I don't know if you learned about loops yet, but it's literally that. Array methods give you the ability to loop through your array, and then on top of that, give you a little bit of extra to work with. So for example, what does the map function give you? Well, the map function is pretty much like this. If we have an array and we say .map, what this takes in is another function that is the transformation. So here I'm just going to put in whatever, or I'm going to put in the transformation function that I want to do with each individual element of my array. That is it, once again. So we could even write the map function by ourselves. We could have our own implementation of the map function. In my case here, I would say, okay, it's going to take 2 arguments, the array and the transformation. And now, what am I doing? Well, I'm actually just going to write a for loop where I say let I is going to be 0. I have to stop it when the array length is reached, right? So I say I smaller than array length, and I go I plus plus, just like that. And now what do I want to do in here? Well, I have my initial array that I now want to iterate through. So I'm going to go with array and then hook into the index of that function. And of that array. And what do I want to do with that? Well, I want to transform it, okay? And now if you have already an understanding of higher order functions or passing functions as a function, that's great. Otherwise, you can watch my other video on it. But this here, what comes in is a function, but it is being passed in as a reference. So what I can do is I can just go and say transformation and then invoke that function, whatever is being passed in. And what do I want to do with that? I want to create a new array from all the newly created elements. So I can go and say here, this is my transformed array, which is going to be empty at this point. But here I'm just going to go and say I want to push to that array. And then at the end, I'm going to return my transformed array. And that, I just try to save it. And that is everything that's actually happening inside of the map function. Like literally we can reproduce this in 5 lines of code. Now, if I, for example, give this if I now say map, or let's say we call this my map, like that. So my map function can now take an array, so I can give it names, and I can also give it my transformation function, which I'm just going to take from down here, okay, like this. And now if I console, or let's go with result here. And if I log out that result, let's see what happens. There we go. That works 100% the same way Maybe I'll show you that one as well, because I don't think I've run this before. It works 100% the same way. We just created our own map function, and I hope that this also shows you that there's not much to it, because we literally did it in like a minute, right? And the only thing we really had to do is loop through our array. That's what map does, okay? Now, why does it have to look, or why does it often look so daunting? There's, like I said, quite a bit of syntax going on. I'm going to get rid of all of this. Actually, I got rid of the wrong thing. I'm going to get rid of my map function right here. What's happening inside of the syntax is basically that we're saying very often when we're using map functions that we're only going to use this transformation once, right? We're not going to have another place in our code where we want to capitalize all of our characters or all of our words if there's an I included. So we basically define a function right in here, and then we just discard it again. So in this case here, I can actually take that out, right? And I can just say here transform function like this, and I can now create my own function called transform function, which is going to take a name as an argument, right? Remember here, the way that map is going to call that is by saying transform, like take the transformation function and then use whatever is the current element of my array, whether it's a 0, index 1 or whatever. It's going to pass in Gigi, then Maya, then Ben, then Boris into that function. So for me to create this transformation function, I'm just going to take exactly the code that I had before inside of that function, and this is my new transform function. Does exactly the same thing. And also, once again, if I console log the output of my map function here, it's still completely unchanged, okay? So there's nothing else happening inside of this map function than us actually passing in a function that will then take an element and transform it. Now, to get to the kind of code you saw at the beginning, we have to start introducing arrow functions. And arrow functions are very often introduced with the promise of this is going to make your code so much nicer, it's going to shorten your code and all of that. And then when you see the first arrow function, let's say here arrow transform, people often ask themselves like, what is actually the benefit of this? Because this is what our function looks like, almost. This is now what our function looks like, right? Honestly, I don't see any improvement. But that is also not the main use case for arrow functions. Or that's not where in my case, in my opinion, arrow functions are actually so much better. I mean, it works, yes. I can just put now my arrow transform in here and it will work the same way. But I haven't gained anything with it, right? So where does my gain come from? Why would I want to, or why is pretty much everybody using arrow functions with array methods? Well, we can first look at our code here. This can be simplified. So if you heard of the ternary operator, this is a perfect use case for that. I can go and say, I want to return something from a ternary operator. So I'm going to say, does the name that is being passed in include the character I? If so, I want to return the name to uppercase. If not, I just return the name. Now, boom, my function is shorter, but this didn't have anything to do with the arrow function. I could have just done this here as well, right? Now, where then do we get any gains? Well, where we get gains from is we now have a one-line return statement here, or a one-line function. Now, with arrow functions, what you can have is an implicit return. That means if my function is so short that it basically just has one computation, one line, I can just implicitly return. In order for me to do that, what I have to do is I got to get rid of my function body, so the curly braces around that, and also of the return statement, right? I've done that already before. Now, if I run this, we see everything still works the same way. But the thing is, now going back to what I said at the beginning, we very often don't need to have an extra name for this transformation because very often we only want to do it once. We only want to do it in this one moment. So in here, instead of actually calling a function or passing in a function that I've already defined, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pass in an anonymous function. What is an anonymous function? Well, it's a function that I define exactly in this moment, and then I'm immediately using it. So in this case here, I can just go into my map function and I just copied everything that follows here after the equal sign. I put it in here and my function here can be commented out, and you'll see that I still have everything working. And this is the structure that we saw right at the beginning, or this is a structure that you will see most often with array methods. You're going to define a function in place with an implicit return, because very often your transformations or your filter conditions or anything that you do with array methods is very often short enough to put it in one line and then just use an anonymous arrow function. So really, when you're trying to learn about array methods, the very first thing you should actually fully understand is the different kind of function syntax and the way that array methods actually work, right? They literally are just a way for you to iterate through your array, through the given array, and then do something with every individual element. I hope that makes sense. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have questions about any specific array methods that I should go through, let me know in the comments. Goodbye.